This guy was really odd. He was deathly afraid of sunlight, preferring to stick to the shadows. This peculiar behavior caught the eye of a nearby priest, who suspected him of being a vampire. So, he went to confront the man. The vampires found never today. And pure silver. Armed with a weapon made of pure silver, the priest slashed through the curtains, letting sunlight flood in. The moment the light touched him, the man's skin began to decay. He was indeed a vampire. People started gathering around, and soon the place was packed. Soldiers set the house on fire. Knowing vampires dread fire, screams echoed from within the house. Suddenly, the sky darkened with clouds, casting an eerie shadow over everything. Then, the man emerged from the flames, his wounds healing rapidly. Looking at the crowd intent on killing him, he felt an indescribable pain. Turns out, he was their king. Originally just a regular guy, he became a vampire solely to protect them, because their kingdom was too small, always under the protection of the Turks. They had to pay a tribute every year, but this year, the Sultan demanded something more. 1,000 boys over the age of 15, to be handed over to join the Turkish new army. For this small nation already limited in population, the demand was a devastating blow. Dracula was furious but still sought to negotiate with the Sultan. Once, they were as close as brothers, fighting side by side on the battlefield, where they were feared by all. Dracula, in particular, was notorious for his brutal impaling technique, earning him the nickname, the Impaler. But now, Dracula had become more cautious, with his people and loved ones being his Achilles heel. The Sultan not only refused his plea but added another condition, demanding his son as a hostage. The negotiation fell apart completely. When his wife learned their son was to be sent to Turkey, she burst into tears, provoking laughter from the Turks and igniting Dracula's rage. As both a father and a king, Dracula could no longer restrain himself and took action. Though he eliminated all his enemies, he also invited endless trouble. Now, with no other choice, he instructed his men to prepare for battle. Then, he left alone for a secret cave he and his men had discovered earlier. Inside the cave, they found a mysterious creature with immense power. Dracula had barely survived their last encounter. After some research, the priest confirmed that this creature in the cave was indeed the first vampire in history. In this ancient cave lies the first vampire in human history, a being who traded his soul to a demon for the power of darkness. Yet, he's trapped forever in this cave unless he finds someone else willing to sell their soul. Today, King Dracula has come here on his own accord. His kingdom is under siege by the Turks, and in a bid to protect his people, Dracula seeks the dark powers to vanquish his enemies. The vampire agrees to his request and lets him drink his blood. While Dracula gains the dark powers, they come with a catch. They only last for 3 days, during which he can't be exposed to light and his craving for human blood will intensify. If he succumbs to this thirst, he'll become a vampire forever. Armed with his newfound strength, Dracula hurries back. The Turkish cannons have been bombarding all night, leaving the castle in ruins. After calming his people, Dracula steps out alone. Now, he possesses the hearing of a bat, the eyesight of an owl, and the strength of a demon. Facing an army alone, he cuts through his enemies with ease, their continuous screams marking his path. The ground littered with the bodies of his foes signifies their victory, but it's only a temporary triumph. To avoid the Turkish cannons, they must flee to the monastery at the mountain's peak overnight. The next day, upon seeing Dracula's handiwork, the Sultan decides to personally lead an army of 100,000. Meanwhile, Dracula's wife notices something off about him. Left with no choice, Dracula reveals the truth. His wife pleads with him to hold on for 3 days. Since Dracula cannot move about during the day, his wife sets off with the main force. At night, they're attacked by a small squad. Just as his wife is about to be killed, Dracula arrives just in time, saving his family but finding many of his people dead or injured. Before dawn, they make it to the safety of the monastery atop the mountain, urging everyone to prepare defenses for the impending Turkish assault. Elsewhere, a surviving soldier from the previous night informs the Sultan about Dracula's transformation into a vampire, aiming to prevent panic within their ranks. The Sultan commands all his soldiers to blindfold themselves and follow him towards the mountaintop. At this point, Dracula's power is dwindling, with just 1 day left. To combat the cravings within, he dares not sleep, spending the night in prayer to God. His son, sensing his father's anxiety, offers him a meat pie. Touched by his son's thoughtfulness, Dracula's resolve strengthens even more. Soon, the Sultan's army arrives at the gates, ready to besiege the monastery where Dracula and his people have sought refuge. The soldiers, blindfolded and advancing into battle, are unaware that their opponent is not human but a vampire with demonic powers. as the Sultan wishes to keep them ignorant of the true nature of their enemy. As the dark mass of the army approaches, Dracula signals to the bats. Soon, countless bats converge on the castle. With a wave of his hand, Dracula commands the bats to attack, quickly felling the soldiers who remain oblivious to what's happening around them. To end the battle swiftly, Dracula gathers all the bats and drops them heavily in the middle of the army, scattering the troops. Watching the Sultan's disheveled retreat, Dracula transforms into a swarm of bats, aiming to capture the leader first, only to find a decoy in his place. Meanwhile, a small squad has stealthily infiltrated the castle. With his wife and child's lives hanging by a thread, Dracula rushes back, but he's too late. His wife falls off a cliff, and his people are brutally slaughtered. As the sun begins to rise, Dracula feels his powers fading away. As his wife lay dying, she implored Dracula to drink her blood, explaining that only by becoming a true vampire could he save their son. With no other options, Dracula accepts his fate and transforms into a true vampire. Witnessing the desperate struggles of his dying people, Dracula asks if they wish for revenge. A unanimous desire for vengeance leads Dracula to share his blood with every surviving member of his community, sparking a real campaign for retribution. On one side stood a human army of 100,000, on the other, a fiercely angry army of vampires. It quickly became evident that human flesh stood no chance against the vampire force. The cunning king hid in his tent, which was lined with silver coins intended to weaken Dracula's powers. Two brothers, once fighting side by side, now faced each other under vastly different banners. One fought for power, while the other fought for his family. Dracula, weakened by the silver, found himself steadily losing ground until he was driven into a corner. In a critical moment, he mustered all his strength to transform into a swarm of bats and stealthily eliminated the Sultan from behind. Meanwhile, the battle outside came to an end, with Dracula's people satisfied with the newfound power they wielded. Not a single enemy was left alive, yet now, Dracula's own followers turned their sights on his son, indicating the situation had spiraled far beyond Dracula's initial intentions. After eliminating the leading rebels among his people, Dracula resolved to take a drastic measure. He dispersed the black fog, allowing sunlight to flood the land instantly. His people's bodies vanished like smoke, their existence erased by the very light they had come to dread. In doing so, Dracula used the last of his strength to protect his kin. Upon returning, his son officially took up the mantle of king, succeeding his father. In the movie's final twist, it's revealed that Dracula did not die, he was saved by a disciple. In a future day, Dracula encounters a woman who is the spitting image of his wife, setting the stage for a new tale.